Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's town hall with Mayor London Breed. We also have joining us for the town hall City Administrator Carmen Chu, Controller Ben Rosenfield, Ann Topier from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Ashley Goffenberger from the Mayor's Budget Office. We're here to talk about our budget process and our city's economic recovery. To submit your questions, you can comment on the Mayor's Facebook page, tag at London Breed on Twitter, email budget@sfgov.org, or call in the number shown on your screen. Now, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Mayor London Breed.
Thank you, Tyra, and good evening, everyone. This is the first in what will be a series of town halls, which I hope are opportunities for the public to hear what we are working on and for us to hear what's important to all of you. We continue to make positive progress in fighting this pandemic, thanks to everyone in this city who is doing their part. We have officially moved into the orange tier, which is a big deal. It's a sign of progress, the progress that we've made in getting our cases to a better place, as well as our vaccination efforts. I'm really proud that almost 80% of our residents over the age of 65 have now received at least a first dose. We're 10% ahead of the national average, and 37% of all residents over 16 have received at least a first dose, which is about 6% higher than the national average. We're moving quickly because we know that the sooner we can get everyone vaccinated, the sooner we can emerge from this pandemic. That's important for our residents, our small businesses, our local economy, and our city's budget. In these town halls, we will cover a range of issues, but right now we are deep in the process of doing the work to get our upcoming budget ready, and that's what I want to focus on today. I'm going to have my budget director, Ashley Goffenberger, give a brief presentation with a little more detail after I speak, and then we will open it up to your questions. We have been collecting questions via email and social media prior to this event, and you could submit questions by posting in the comments on Facebook, replying to us on Twitter, calling in to the number shown on the screen, or emailing budget@sfgov.org. It's no secret that the last year has been pretty devastating on our economy and on our city as a whole, which has severely impacted our city's budget. In January, we were projecting a $650 million deficit for the next 2 years. And that's after already addressing a $1.3 billion 2-year deficit last year. To close that kind of deficit, we were looking at layoffs and cuts to basic city services. That includes things like laying off police officers, cutting street cleaning services, and having longer 911 response times, things that have a real impact on the lives of our residents. But thankfully, President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, got the American Rescue Plan passed through Congress, which, in addition to providing support in the forms of direct payments to people in need, funding for vaccination efforts, and other critical priorities, it has provided $630 million to San Francisco, which can help us to close our budget deficit. That means we can avoid painful layoffs. It means we can avoid cuts to basic city services. It means, sorry about that. It means we can focus on our economic recovery going forward. And we also received another bit of good news recently, that we actually have a one-time surplus of $125 million for just this year. Now, that doesn't mean that all of our problems are solved. This is one-time money that was unexpected. But it does provide us with some flexibility to provide immediate support for those most impacted by the pandemic, which is why we've put together a spending plan that protects small businesses and supports arts and cultural organizations that have seen a devastating loss in funding. We're also using the funding to support young people this summer to help them catch up after a year of distance learning. It will provide rental relief for those in need and fund overdose prevention programs. But again, that's just some one-time spending support for this year. As we are looking ahead to the next 2 years, we are putting our budget together and we are looking at how we can continue to invest in San Francisco, both by meeting our immediate and long-term challenges. When I issued the budget instructions, I highlighted 4 key areas I wanted every city department to focus on, in addition to the critical services that they provide. Those are supporting our small businesses and economic recovery, prioritizing equity so we are supporting all San Franciscans, implementing solutions to homelessness and mental health, and continuing our response to COVID. Today, I really want to focus on the first of these topics, namely how we're going to move our economy forward and support our small businesses. When we talk about solutions in this area, for example, I'm talking about ongoing support for the Shared Spaces program, additional grants to small businesses and nonprofits who are continuing to struggle, funds to support emerging businesses, and activating our public spaces so they are welcoming everyone, including street cleanliness, public safety, and ambassador programs. As we emerge from this pandemic, we have a real opportunity to make this city shine. We can bring life back downtown and we can bring economic support to our neighborhood corridors. We can take the best of what the city has done during the pandemic, like creating thousands of new outdoor dining spaces, and make them a part of every neighborhood in San Francisco. Look, I know budgets are confusing. There's a lot of numbers thrown around, but ultimately, this is about our priorities and our future. I want to hear from you about your concerns, your questions. Our recovery is going to take all of us coming together. Today, I'm joined by City Administrator Carmen Chu and our Controller Ben Rosenfield, our Interim Director of Economic and Workforce Development, Ann Topier. All 3 of them are playing a critical role in our economic recovery so they can help answer questions as well. Now, before I open up to questions, I want to give Ashley a chance to provide a brief presentation on our current budget situation. Ashley?
Thank you, Mayor Breed, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Grafenberger, and I'm the Mayor's Budget Director. Tonight, I'll be providing you with a brief overview of the city's budget and fiscal outlook, as well as share some updates to that fiscal outlook and how those changes are going to impact the budget for the upcoming 2-year process. To start, I'd like to quickly orient you all to the city's budget. The recently adopted fiscal 21 budget for San Francisco is $13.6 billion. This is made up of $6.2 billion in general fund and $7.4 billion of non-general fund or enterprise departments like the airport, port, and MTA. And because San Francisco is a consolidated city and county, San Francisco and its budget includes funding for standard city functions like police, fire, and parks, as well as county functions like public health and human services. In December, the Mayor's Budget Office, in conjunction with the Controller's Office and the Board's Budget and Legislative Analysts, issued an update to the city's 5-year financial plan, which projects revenue and expenditure changes for the upcoming 5 fiscal years and really sets the stage for the upcoming 2-year budget process and informs the instructions that the Mayor issues to all city departments as they develop their budget proposals. For the upcoming 2-year cycle for fiscal year 21, 22, and 22-23, we were projecting a 2-year general fund shortfall of about $653 million. This is, of course, a significant projected shortfall, but luckily much less stark than the $1.5 billion shortfall we were facing last year and balanced, all without layoffs or major service reductions. That $653 million projected shortfall was driven by three main factors. First, our local tax revenues were projecting to recover much more slowly than anticipated. Secondly, we had previously assumed savings related to our employee unions, but now we are assuming that we will pay those wage increases in the next fiscal year. And lastly, we had previously assumed no cost to continue to respond to COVID in the upcoming fiscal year, and now we are including those costs in our projection. To help close the projected shortfall, the mayor issued instructions to all city departments to propose budgets that included a reduction of general fund support equal to 7.5%, with an additional 2.5% contingency should our fiscal conditions worsen. In following those instructions, the mayor asked departments to prioritize core services and present clear trade-offs when presenting their budget proposals, but that these departmental budget proposals could include reductions, including contract savings, efficiencies, and cuts to personnel. Departments submitted their budgets to the mayor at the end of February, and in order to meet the required level of reductions, many departments proposed reductions to staffing and cuts to critical city services. For this upcoming budget, as the mayor mentioned, the top priorities will be supporting recovery, making every dollar count, and prioritizing programs and services with real equitable outcomes, continuing to focus on our vulnerable populations through advancing work on homelessness and mental health, and of course, continuing to respond to COVID. Since issuing our 5-year forecast and instructions to departments in December, there have been some fairly significant developments, the most significant being the passage of the American Rescue Plan earlier this month. Among the many elements of this $1.9 trillion relief package, the most impactful for us as it relates to this upcoming budget process is the inclusion of $350 billion in direct aid to state and local governments, of which we expect San Francisco to receive $636 million. If this relief is able to be used as flexibly as we anticipate, this could largely offset the $653 million shortfall that we have been projecting earlier this year, helping to avoid many of the painful cuts we would otherwise need to consider in order to balance our budget. And while not directly offsetting the projected shortfall I've been speaking about, our understanding is that the American Rescue Plan also contains a number of other funding for important priorities here locally, including rental assistance, education funding for SFUSD and City College, and funds for the airport and SFMTA. Our office, in conjunction with the Controller's Office and the board's legislative analysts, will be issuing an official update to that 5-year financial projection early next week, and it'll incorporate everything we know about stimulus, as well as other updated revenue and expenditure projections, all of which will likely result in a much, much smaller projected shortfall for the upcoming budget process. As for what comes next, the mayor's office is currently reviewing departmental budget proposals that were submitted at the end of February. Those proposals were obviously based on financial information that will be meaningfully revised in the coming week, and therefore the very difficult cuts that were proposed will likely no longer be necessary to balance the budget. The mayor's budget office will also spend the next few months meeting with departments, community groups, and other stakeholders to hear their priorities and work to develop budget proposals that align with the mayor's policy priorities. On June 1st, the mayor will introduce a balanced 2-year budget to the Board of Supervisors, and then they will spend the months of June and July deliberating and voting on the budget before it returns to the mayor for her signature, typically by August 1st. And quickly, as the mayor mentioned, I just wanted to highlight the current year budget supplemental that the mayor and the board broadly agreed to and is now pending and working its way through the Board of Supervisors. As the mayor mentioned, in the current fiscal year, we are projecting a budget surplus of $125 million, largely driven by various one-time revenues that we do not expect to continue. To be responsive to the immediate needs of the city, the mayor and the board agreed to target that surplus towards some key emergency relief initiatives, including $53 million for business relief in the form of grants and loans to small businesses, and waivers and deferrals of business registration fees. It also included $24 million for arts and culture programs that were impacted by the loss of hotel tax. It also included $17.7 million for youth, both to augment summer programming and support internship opportunities for San Francisco youth. It also included $10.1 million for rental relief, and $3.6 million to support vulnerable populations through various pilot programs for overdose prevention at the Department of Public Health, and support for vulnerable and undocumented families who would not otherwise be eligible for other forms of state and federal COVID relief. So this process is separate and apart from the upcoming 2-year budget process I've been describing, but was a very important step to provide needed emergency relief in the current fiscal year without having to wait for that budget process to play out over the coming months. So to conclude, the $653 million shortfall that was projected in December informed the instructions that the mayor issued to departments to submit budget proposals that reduce general fund support. Now we expect to have meaningful financial updates that will be published next week that will likely offset the need to make those dramatic reductions in order to balance the budget. And lastly, over the coming weeks and months, there will be a heightened focus on how we can advance the mayor's priorities in this year's budget around economic recovery, equity, homelessness and behavioral health, and COVID response, all while ensuring that the city is resilient and no worse off financially once we exit this pandemic and fully recover. So with that, thank you for the time, and I will turn it back over to Mayor Breed.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Okay, with that, we are going to open it up for some questions. Again, you can submit your questions in the comments or by emailing budget@sfgov.org. We won't be able to get to every single question, but we will gather all of those questions, and we plan to respond to them after the town hall. This is just the first in a series of meetings that we're having to hear from the public. So please make sure that you reach out to us. This is not going to be the only opportunity, but anytime to provide suggestions on things that you'd like to see or questions that you have about the budget. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Tyra to facilitate. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Breed. So the first question talks about the headlines in the news say the tech companies are out migrating to other places for cheaper rents. How do you foresee that impacting our economic recovery here in San Francisco?
Well, I want Ben to just talk a little bit about that. Ben Rosenfield is the controller for the city and county of San Francisco and can provide us with the financial insight on what that means.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mayor Breed, and good evening, everybody. So obviously, businesses are a big part of our general fund tax picture in the city. It's our second largest tax revenue source, summing to a little bit over $1 billion. And we certainly all want to see businesses start here, grow here, and stay here. And there have been a couple of headlines related to a couple of companies intending to leave the city. A couple other points, though. Tech employment in the city has actually now rebounded to a level that it was at prior to the pandemic. And so of all of the business impacts we're seeing at the moment in the city, and they are many across many parts of our business sector, impacts in the technology sector are among the most limited. The bigger worry for those of us working on the city's budget and finances actually is not relocation of companies, but actually the return of workers into our downtown core that have gone through a period of extended telecommuting. And so I think in terms of financial impacts over the next couple of years, that's going to be the more significant issue for us, because a lot of our business taxes are assessed not on where a company is headquartered in San Francisco, but actually where their workers are working from.
Well, thank you for that feedback, Ben. And also, I just want to be clear, San Francisco is more than technology companies. We have a lot of other industries here, a lot of other opportunities. And at the end of the day, I know that there are a number of companies that have developed work from home plans as a result of COVID and want to extend those programs as we begin to reopen. But I've said to people time and time again that as grateful as I am to have the option, I am looking forward to the day that we're going to be able to all come back to work and more people are showing up at work so that our city can come alive again. Working from home is tired, and I'm tired of it. So I'm looking forward to the day that we're able to do that. I think we're going to see some things happen and bounce back. San Francisco is one of the greatest cities in the world. It's one of the safest as it relates to COVID and what we've been able to accomplish with the pandemic. So I think that our economy is going to rebound. It's going to take some time, but I think people are going to want to come back to San Francisco.
Thank you. So the next question reads, I own a small souvenir gift shop near Fisherman's Wharf, and my customers are almost all tourists. Because of the pandemic and health orders, there's less tourism in San Francisco, and business has declined significantly. When does the city expect tourism to pick up again? What is the city doing to attract tourism again? And Andrew H. asked, what is the plan for bringing tourism back to the city around Union Square? And will there be street festivals this summer in the city?
Well, thank you for your question. And I just want to start by saying we're still in the midst of this pandemic. So as much as we're opening up our museums at 50% capacity, our restaurants indoor at 50% capacity, retail is open and has expanded. A number of places throughout San Francisco are starting to reopen. What we notice, there are people, especially from around the Bay Area, they're coming and they're visiting San Francisco, but we have to proceed with caution. The last thing we want to do is close the city again. And as soon as it is safely to do so, games are going to resume at Oracle Park and at Chase Center and other places and events and live venues. We're working very closely with the Hotel and Convention and Visitors Bureau. But I do want to turn this over to our city administrator, Carmen Chu, to talk just a little bit about what we can expect to see as it relates to tourism, because she is responsible for the convention center. We know that we want to get conventions back in San Francisco. Large-scale events, of course, is going to be contingent upon the vaccine process, and what's happening around our COVID numbers. But as soon as safely possible, we're going to do everything we can to begin to reopen. So I wanted to give also our city administrator, Carmen Chu, an opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you, Mayor Breed, and of course to the person who submitted the question, thank you for the question as well. I think we have seen a pretty significant impact in terms of tourism and the impacts on our local economy. I think there was a San Francisco Chronicle article earlier today that spoke about some of the significant impact going from visitors at a 26 million person level to something like 10 million in 2020. The impact of that has been pretty dramatic and significant for our city. We saw spending by visitors drop by over 70% from $10 billion to $2 billion. In addition to that, we have jobs that are supported by our tourism sector to the tune of 86,000 people, and that dropped pretty significantly in 2020 to 20,000 people. And so we know that the tourism sector, the people who come into our city to enjoy our sites, our restaurants, our souvenir shops, are all a critical part of how we come back. I want to thank the mayor because, with her leadership and foresight, as well as with President Yi of the Board of Supervisors at the time, she started a process very, very early on in this pandemic, the creation of an economic recovery task force to really lay the groundwork for how it is that San Francisco can come back strong, more equitably and quickly for economic recovery. This was actually set in place and in motion back in April, so pretty immediately on the heels of going into a shelter-in-place scenario. And the task force laid out a number of different recommendations for how the city can move forward. One of the key things that we have executed on is really making sure that we're putting up very significant efforts in terms of our mass vaccinations and testing. This is critically important if we want to move forward, bring back tourism, bring back convention business, which is essential for businesses. We do need to make sure that our public health metrics are well underway. And I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing pretty high levels of vaccination rates now in addition to all of the different sites that we have set up. Other things that we're doing is really putting a focused effort on how it is that we will bring back our convention and visitor center. As many people know, when people come in for a convention business, it really helps, as I've heard from our convention folks, weekday activities. And so typically we see so many people who come into our city on weekends in order to enjoy all that San Francisco has to offer. Much of that is regional, in addition to our leisure travelers. But during the weekday, we really depend very much on the convention business to really help to keep our businesses supported and to keep our economy rolling. And so to that end, we've been working very, very closely with our convention facilities to make sure that we have the best cleaning and safety protocols set up in place. And so I'm happy to say that we did receive recently a certification from Global Biorisk Advisory Council, which has independently reviewed our safety protocols to give us a gold stamp in terms of our high levels of care to that regard. So we want to make sure that when people come back to San Francisco, they know that they're visiting the best and the safest place in the country. The other pieces that we're working to really put in place is to make sure that we're taking a look at our convention businesses and what has been booked for the coming, of course, late summer and fall scenarios, and saying, what could we do to enable these conventions to happen? What are the protocols that we have to put in place in order to make sure that we can support these activities returning to San Francisco? Now, all of that depends on us working together to make sure that the pandemic remains under control, but we really want to get ahead of it and start planning to make sure that when we're ready to open, when we're ready to bring back visitors, we can do that quickly, safely, and have everything set up and make sure that there's a very high level of confidence to visitors who are coming to San Francisco. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Tyra, well, I think you answered the question. So
Yes.
let's go to the next question, Tyra.
Yes, thank you. So Emerald B wants to know, will gyms and fitness industries be included in San Francisco's grant programs? The fitness industry, as many of you know, in San Francisco have suffered disproportionately, being closed and having some of the most restrictive limitations. So venues and restaurants have received support, but fitness has not, and we've been categorized similarly. So will they be receiving any benefits from the grant programs?
Well, actually, they should qualify for the grant programs. In fact, many of our grant programs were designed to primarily prioritize businesses that have not been able to open, and gyms fit within that category because there have been a lot of businesses that are considered essential, like grocery stores, but we know that the fitness industry has suffered tremendously. The city's already provided support of up to $1 billion. And this is just resources directly from the city. 24 million in loans and grant programs have been used to support more than almost 1,400 small businesses just this past year. And the city has also provided 17.7 million in direct support to more than 18,000 impacted workers and their families. And so I want to provide just a little bit more perspective around what we're doing as it relates to businesses. Initially, we had put off some of the fees. We postponed payments of the fees, but some of the more recent resources that we've received in our city budget has given us the opportunity to eliminate fees for so many small businesses, which should include gyms as well. And so at this point, I want to turn it over to the Acting Director of Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Ann Topier, to talk about other options for our gym community, because we know they have been suffering tremendously.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Emerald, for the question. And you are correct, Mayor. The gyms are eligible for all of our grant and loan programs, and to date, we've awarded funds to 28 different gyms and fitness businesses in San Francisco. We also know that the fitness industry has been impacted, very heavily impacted, along with our bars and restaurants and hotels and entertainment and personal services. The second round of the Resiliency Fund grant program set aside $1.5 million for businesses that were forced to close for more than 6 months, which includes gyms, salons, bars, and indoor entertainment venues. And our upcoming $12.4 million San Francisco Relief Grant program specifically targets businesses that have been forced to close for more than 6 months as one of the eligibility criteria. And we're very excited that as of today, and the move into the orange tier, gyms can increase their capacity up to 25%, open up their locker rooms, and resume indoor classes. You can also reach out to the OEWD website and the small business hotline, which is 415-554-6134, or go to sfosb@sfgov.org, and you can speak to a person in Cantonese, Mandarin, Spanish. We've served just about 7,000 clients on that hotline, and we just encourage everyone to go to the OEWD website /COVID. And there's all the information you need on how to apply for these grants and loans.
Great. So this is a couple of questions about shared spaces. This person said, shared spaces have brought life into communities during the pandemic. I have enjoyed them very much. We all have. Will the city continue to fund shared spaces? And Mara M wants to know, will SF small businesses be eligible for reimbursements on parklet construction costs?
So first of all, I've enjoyed shared spaces as well. And we announced a plan to make them permanent. So we're going through that process as we speak. We've also announced $1.6 million in grants for shared spaces, and we're looking forward to including more support for shared spaces in the upcoming budget. We know it's an expense that sometimes some businesses can't afford, and so we wanted to provide various options for all businesses here in San Francisco. I think this is an amazing program, and I'm looking forward to making sure that this program stays in San Francisco and more people have an opportunity to do it as well.
Great, great. So again, this is some workforce development questions. This person writes, I've been unemployed for over a year and been relying on unemployment insurance. I want to go back to work. What programs or workforce development programs are funded in the budget? Will these programs continue? And where can I find more information?
Well, the city's provided over $17.7 million in direct support to more than 18,000 impacted workers and families. I talked about that earlier. And recently, we announced $28 million program to expand workforce development, paid training, job placement for adults and youth in San Francisco. Neighborhood satellite and specialized job centers that we have in various neighborhoods should be readily available for a number of people seeking employment. Young adult workforce training programs, industry-specific workforce training programs, and this is all out of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Our goal is to make sure that we provide opportunities and get people back to work as quickly as possible. And I wanted to turn it over to Ann to talk a little bit more specifically about how someone who's looking for employment can access the resources that the city has available.
Thank you, Mayor. So we encourage everyone to reach out to our workforce hotline, which is 415-701-4817, or you can go online to workforce.connection@sfgov.org. And you will speak to a real person when you call that hotline who can assist you in Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Tagalog, Vietnamese, or Russian. We will connect you to Workforce Development Services to help you enter a career path either through counseling or direct support. I would encourage you to also look specifically at the Right to Recover Act, which provides financial support equal to 2 weeks of lost income for those who have to quarantine as a result of COVID-19 and need assistance to take time off work, or the Family Relief Fund, which is about to be reactivated and offers monthly financial support to families that do not qualify for local, state, or federal assistance. Our Workforce Development Division, as the mayor mentioned, also just launched the Building Back Stronger request for proposals, which will fund $28 million of workforce development grants. The deadline to submit to that grant is next Wednesday. We expect to fund an array of services through that grant, including tech, healthcare, construction, general employment, emerging industries, in further of our economic recovery goals. And also, President Biden also signed the American Rescue Plan into law on March 11th, which includes extended and expanded employment insurance benefits. And if you go to our website, all of the information you need is available oewd.org/COVID.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This question reads, is the city considering implementing universal basic income for low-income residents?
Well, the city is definitely considering it, and there are a number of pilots that exist currently in the city for universal income. The Abundant Birth Project is one of those programs where we provide $1,000 a month, no strings attached, to women, African American and Samoan mothers, because of the data we have, because we show that although they represent less than 4% of the births here in San Francisco, they represent over 50% of the maternal deaths. And so we're seeing disproportionately that, those particular women are suffering during childbirth. Our goal is to try and change the outcome. So this Abundant Birth Project was an important part of trying to address those disparities. And in addition to that, support for artists in specific zip codes throughout San Francisco. A lot of the low-income neighborhoods where artists are, who have suffered the most during this pandemic, providing a universal income model with that. And we're looking at, with our Dream Keepers initiative, universal income for those in the African American community and low-income communities. And so we are definitely have a serious interest in universal income and how we know that could make a significant difference in people's lives. And it's something we're definitely open to.
Thank you. Thank you. So Heather B. asked Mayor Breed, why doesn't the city pay teachers enough to live here?
Well, I think that the latest data I saw, about 70% of the teachers who work in the San Francisco Unified School District actually live in San Francisco. But we also know that many of those teachers have probably lived here for a really long time, and are maybe fortunate enough to have access to affordable housing in some capacity. But we do need to do, of course, a better job with paying our teachers more. And that's why I put on the ballot last year Proposition J, which the voters passed, and we appreciate that. It provides $48 million in additional revenue to the school district for teacher salaries. So we are hopeful that that money is being put to good use. The school district is, as you know, responsible for the oversight and the decisions that are made. But this specifically is to go to teacher salary. Last year, when the school district was dealing with a deficit that would have required layoffs, we provided $15 million from our city resources. We're putting forth, of course, new investments. One of the things that was important to me was dealing with some of the challenges around teacher turnover in those schools that were struggling the most. And I put forward $10 million in additional stipends to help with teacher retention in many of the schools where we were losing teachers at a rapid pace. So we're doing a whole host of things, and we hope that eventually the outcomes that we need to provide teachers with the additional resources that they need, that would make a difference.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question reads, what investments is the city going to be making in the next budget cycle to ensure SFMTA is able to recover more quickly than our expectations?
Well, MTA, as we expected that there was going to be a deficit, and fortunately, because of the resources that we're getting for stimulus support for transportation, MTA is going to be able to cover their budget deficit, I believe, Ashley, for the next 2 years. And so far, we're okay, but we're still not out of the woods. And we are going to have to look at something long-term, a long-term solution to increase the budget for the MTA in order to make sure that we're able to cover the expenses related to Muni. As we build more housing, as we see our economy recover, as more people return to work, as kids are back in school, we need to make sure that our public transportation and the ability to get people around more efficiently is something that people feel comfortable and safe on and can rely on. And so that's really important. MTA is going to be okay for now, but moving towards the future, we're going to need to come up with something a lot more concrete to stabilize their budget and increase services.
Thank you. This next question reads, how are you addressing the city's long-term structural budget deficit?
I'm sorry.
How are you addressing the city's long-term structural budget deficit?
So, it's been really tough. I truly believe that the city, luckily, because we have put so much money over the years, during the good years, we put money into the reserves, that's the reason why we were able to close a $1.5 billion budget deficit with no layoffs during this pandemic, and why we're in a much better position financially than most major cities. I think it's important that we don't just take in whatever surplus we get or stimulus money we get and spend it all at once. We need to be very responsible with how we designate those resources, but also how we put more money away so that we don't have to make the hard decisions around layoffs and a number of other things that will definitely have an impact on services. So we usually do a financial plan. We do a long-term financial plan with the city. We have budget projections. We talk about anywhere between 5 and 10 years out, and then we make hard choices. And sometimes things change. But at the end of the day, I do think it's important to develop the appropriate financial long-term plan. We look at the projections, we make the hard decisions, but we put as much money away as possible and not just spend it just because we see a need that we want to see met. Because ultimately, sometimes this is one-time spending, sometimes we have long-term, we have resources that last a very long time, but working with our controller, working with our budget director and a number of other financial people, and our economists, we focus on making some of the best, most responsible, and as far as I'm concerned, some of the most conservative decisions around how we spend money here in San Francisco. But ultimately, it's not completely my decision. The Board of Supervisors also plays a role in helping to shape the budget. And my hope is that we will continue to work together to make concrete decisions for the long-term financial stability of the city.
Thank you. So we have Mac H via Facebook. What are some specific ways the budget will invest in COVID response? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Oh, sorry. I'll repeat the question. Mac H via Facebook asks, what are some specific ways the budget will invest in the COVID response? I think we're having a little technical difficulty. Ashley, is there a way you can jump in there and just?
Sure. Yeah, happy to answer that question, if that's okay. So obviously in the last year, the city has had to be very flexible and dynamic to address all of our COVID response needs, and spun up, quite the COVID operation seemingly, overnight to respond to this, the pandemic. So for the upcoming year, it's clear that we're going to have to continue to respond in a number of key ways, but how and what that is kind of being developed and constantly evolving as we get new information. So we're looking at continuing the key programs that have been vital in protecting public health and throughout the last year. And so that includes testing, contact tracing, PPE distribution, and then also, of course, the vaccination sites that we have set up throughout the city. So we anticipate needing to continue those programs as long as they're needed. In addition to those kind of key health response programs, the city also set up a number of programs around food security, other community programs that served, many of the communities most impacted by the pandemic in the last year. So we're looking at understanding what types of programs we'll need to continue there. And of course, as I said, it's very dynamic. So we're working really closely with city leaders and public health experts to try and understand what the need for those programs will look like, especially as we accelerate vaccination and as the city continues to reopen. So there will certainly be some continued response to COVID, and we're evaluating what will need to continue into this current year as we get new information about this pandemic.
Thank you for that, Ashley. So I want to ask Carmen too, how is the budget going to support and sustain nonprofits and our community-based organizations? As you probably know, they've been hit really hard as well during the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Tyra. I think in general, what we've seen is that has been a priority in the mayor's budget, and we certainly have seen that very recently, is that we've seen the city keep nonprofit contracts whole in the last year, especially in 2020, even though we had a pretty significant budget challenge. We've also seen recently a supplemental that came through for arts funding to also help and assist our arts community. And so I think as a whole, San Francisco is committed as much as we possibly can afford it to try to make sure that we're continuing to support our nonprofit partners who have continued to be on the front lines alongside with our city employees in terms of the COVID response. So I think that Ashley can speak more to what's specifically in the budget, but I know that in the city administrator's profile, we do have a number of different grant funding that is being kept made whole for this current year, and we'll continue to work towards that goal for the upcoming year as well.
Thank you. So I want to direct this question to Anne. This pertains to small businesses and the increase in robberies they're experiencing. Will there be any resources available to help them recover from that and the crisis? And that's for Anne.
Thank you, Tyra. So we were excited recently by the launch of Avenue Greenlight, which is a philanthropically funded initiative to promote small business economic recovery and community vibrancy in San Francisco, along with Ripple, which is the San Francisco Council of District Merchants, which will deploy $1.7 million in privately donated dollars to up to 34 merchant associations to be used for projects to improve commercial corridors and support throughout the recovery. And these are dollars that can be used for security and safety in our small business corridors and neighborhoods. We've also, we have over the past year provided about 57% of our grant recipients to small women-owned businesses and 67% to minority-owned businesses along every neighborhood corridor in the city. And so we will continue to provide that small business support. I did want to just again highlight that the Small Business and Worker Hotline provides technical assistance to small businesses. We've served about 7,000 clients on that hotline this year. And we've had just last week over 1 million views of our COVID resource page. So I encourage everyone to look at those websites and reach out to our hotline for all of the technical assistance and support that we can provide there.
Thank you. I want to continue on the line of small businesses. We have a question reading that 90% of this small business owners' income was lost during the COVID pandemic, and they want to know what resources will be available to help them, help small businesses and help them. Madam Mayor, we can't hear you. We're having some technical difficulties with the mayor, but Anne, if you can jump in and sort of help out.
Thank you, Tyra. So we did have, invested about $24 million in our invested neighborhoods loans and grants over the past year for small businesses. We expect to be also adding another $25 million to continue those resiliency grants going into the next year, which are all dedicated toward small business recovery. And again, the grants program, all of this information is on our website at oewd.org.
Thank you. I want to check in with the mayor to see if her, the sound is still off, Mayor. So While someone helps the mayor recover her sound, I just want to look on the board and see if there are any other questions that we can address for our San Francisco community. Let's see. Oh, great. This is a great one. This kind of ties into the CBOs. Yes. So they wanted to talk a little bit about not only supporting arts organizations and community-based organizations, but how is the city, and I believe this should go to Carmen Chu, go to support individual artists that obviously were deeply impacted during the pandemic.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the key highlights and focus areas during our conversations with the Economic Recovery Task Force was specifically around arts and entertainment. It was one of the industries that was most immediately impacted by COVID-19 and continues to be the industries that are most impacted and will be the last to return when it comes to mass gatherings, and big events. And so we know that that is a key piece to our recovery, is how it is that we help to support this community, especially during our transition. I think the other piece that's really important to highlight here is that we also recognize that in San Francisco, many people come to San Francisco to visit, to stay, and come again and again because of our arts and cultural environment here. And so we know that this is really truly a unique aspect of San Francisco's attraction, and we want to make sure that we continue to support businesses in these industries. A few things, I think, in terms of programs within the city administrator's office, we have grants for the arts. As I mentioned earlier, we recently received the good news that the mayor's office had backfilled the current loss in terms of revenues in order to make our grantees whole. And so this supports many of our arts organizations, and many which are smaller. This year, we actually increased funding for many of our trans and Black community members who have arts organizations and tie-ins. And this is something that's incredibly important as we think about recovery and equity and organizations that have the least ability to be able to weather the storm. In addition to that, we also have our Entertainment Commission, who has been working really hard to try to create creative avenues in which our arts community can thrive and to exist, especially as we transition away from more strict closures to more reopening over time. This includes jam permits in many of our shared spaces program, among other programs that are currently available. So more to come on that, but we definitely want to make sure that San Franciscans know that we appreciate and we value our arts and cultural organizations and institutions. It's part of our life fabric here and makes San Francisco unique and special. And we need to figure out ways to help this struggling industry, especially during this transition.
Great. So I want to check in with the mayor to make sure. No sound, Mayor, but you look fabulous. So that's that's a plus. No worries, no worries. So I do want to say thank you, everyone, for giving all this great information. Our city administrator, Carmen Chu, Controller Ben Rosenfield, Ann Topier from Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and of course, Ashley Rothenberger from the Mayor's Budget Office. I do want to encourage everyone, if you have more questions, to email mayorlondonbreed@sfgov.org, or you want to make sure you stay abreast of what's going on in the mayor's office by checking sfmayor.org/townhall. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution, and San Francisco, have a great evening.